Hey everybody, welcome back to every episode of Phineas and Ferb Reviewed. It's time to tackle Season 2, by far the longest of the series, with a whopping 64 individual episodes to tackle. Highlights include the first hour-long special, Summer Belongs to You, the first Christmas special, Phineas and Ferb Christmas Vacation, and a special musical clip show special entitled Phineas and Ferb Musical Cliptastic Countdown. No, not the version hosted by Kelly Osbourne. We don't talk about that one here. That's in Season 4. This is the original. But before we get into the new season, let's look back at Season 1 and refresh our memories, shall we? As you can see by the chart, Season 1 had 2 meh episodes, 14 good, 16 great, 9 amazing, and 2 classics. All in all, a good season. Very close to being great. By the time we're done here, we'll find out just how Season 2 stacks up against Season 1. You know, going into this review, I was a tad bit nervous, mainly because I found that it's incredibly hard to talk about a comedy series and praise it beyond just saying that the jokes are funny or that the plots work. It's much easier to do that when the show's terrible, but of all the words I have to describe this show, terrible is not one of them. And Season 2 is going to be very interesting. As mentioned, Summer Belongs to You is the first hour-long special of the show, the first of 7 actually, and oddly enough, of all the hour-long specials the show would produce, not counting the TV movie, this is the only one to air outside of Season 4. That's weird, but that's okay. Season 3 brought us the movie, Across the Second Dimension, and that'll be fun to talk about when it's time to review Season 3, but for now, it's time for Season 2. The system is the same as last time. I rate each episode on a 1 to 6 star scale. Technically, I guess it's a 0 to 6 star scale, although to be perfectly honest, I don't foresee myself ever giving any episode 0 stars. And then we tally up the results at the end and analyze the season as a whole. Savvy? Let's do this. Episode 201, The Lake Nose Monster. Phineas and Ferb discover the Lake Nose Monster in Lake Nose. Doofenshmirtz plots to steal all the zinc from Lake Nose. Candace becomes a lifeguard. Pretty cool that we're starting off Season 2 with a 22-minute episode. And for a season premiere, this one's pretty good. So the Flynn Fletcher family treks out to Lake Nose, where Lawrence tells them the tale of the mysterious Lake Nose monster. The boys set out to see if they can find him, while Candace distracts herself by becoming a lifeguard with Jeremy, under a very strange man for a boss. While Doof's plan directly threatens the boys and the Lake Nose monster. The thing about this particular episode is that there isn't one plot that I like the whole way through. There are bits and pieces of each of the 3 stories that really jump out at me and that I really like. For the Phineas and Ferb story, it's not that interesting until Nosy comes into the picture. Then it got really sweet. It was nice seeing the 3 of them bond, but then that bizarre misunderstanding with Nosy and the equipment was admittedly a bit of a turnoff. Sure, they do set it up that Nosy despises being photographed and being exposed, and of course with him being an underwater creature, he has no understanding of human technology, but it was still pretty jarring. And yes, they do reconcile at the end and things are fine, and technically from a story standpoint, it works. It's just a personal gripe, I admit. So while the entire thing isn't invigorating, there are moments that I point to that I really love. The Doofenshmirtz story, I think it has the dumbest plot, but the best jokes. The first is when Perry's getting his mission, and he steps onto this log ride and is taken through this tunnel, and this batch of animatronic animals starts singing the mission song. I think it's one of the funniest songs of the entire series, to be honest. I swear, I can't get through one sitting of the song without laughing my head off. Oh, and then there's Monogram's hilarious quote right over there. The fact that he both says it to Perry's face, and says it with such a straight face, is what sells it so beautifully. Doofenshmirtz's plan is so freaking confusing, and I know that's the intention. Okay, so he wants to steal all the zinc from the lake because the Kool-Aid Man is red. I don't know. There's clearly no endgame here, and the fact that the writers based the story around that fact is honestly what makes it so hilarious. I think a lesser show would not have done something that hilarious. I really also love the big laundry joke, which they complete in the end credits and then bring back in a later episode. I won't spoil it, but it's glorious. And then Doof's rant about genies in the middle of everything while Perry's trying to break out. I swear he has the most random thoughts ever, and it's just a joy when he unapologetically goes on and on about the most random things of all time. So yeah, the plot is just an excuse to tell a lot of funny jokes. But To its credit, it has a lot of funny jokes. But the lack of plot, or even idea for a plot, is something that hurts it, albeit minorly. It's a comedy show. In a comedy show, you go for the jokes first. If you can woven in a good story, great. If not, you better make sure your jokes are funny. And finally, the Candace plot. It's alright. I don't think it's bad per se, but it doesn't grab me the way the other plots do. Remember how I said Candace used to be my least favorite character? Well, back when that was still true, I really liked when Candace was fired for freaking out so much unnecessarily, and then didn't like it as much when she was rehired, especially because her boss, Captain Bob Weber, is someone who does things on a whim with no sense of direction, and it's not really that endearing the way they write him, to be honest. Now that she's no longer my least favorite character, that honor belongs to Linda, I tend to look at this from a slightly different view. It's much more tolerable this time around, and it is more rewarding seeing her get rehired after saving Weber's life, but I am much more invested in the other two plots. And then there's the ending, where the boys promise to Nosy that they'll never reveal his existence to anyone, and then when Candace asks them for proof, they keep their promise. It's a nice moment, and Ferb's speech is nice, but then that part where the guy calls it boring is really hilarious. That's kind of it. Overall, you have an episode that's got a lot of great moments and good jokes, but a lot of moments also that I just don't bat an eye for at all. All in all, I give it 3 stars. Remember, that's still a good episode. Still, a nice season premiere episode, and it does set a nice tone for the rest of the season. Episode 202A, Interview with a Platypus. Phineas and Ferb build an animal translator. Candace tries spending time with Jeremy. Doofenshmirtz tries to flood the tri-state area. It's a relatively simple episode. The boys want to find out what Perry's growl means. They build a translator, but after discovering that it works on other animals, they decide to use it on other animals. And it turns into this full-blown story about the boys and Isabella helping to decipher what each individual animal wants. I won't say it's necessarily great, but it kept my attention. I liked how they tried to explain the idea of television to Pinky. I also liked near the end when Candace storms in and goes on a rant about the animals. She's clearly blowing off steam because her date didn't go well, but the animals don't know that, and they don't care. All they know is that she offended them, and her getting chased around town by them was hilarious. Speaking of Candace, her story did actually have some funny moments. I liked seeing Candace try to figure out video games, and by Jeremy's reactions, failing miserably. And then apparently Susie's pet poodle comes in and growls at her and takes her shoe and drops it in the toilet. That was pretty funny, and the doof plot easily had the best jokes in the episode. What kind of sad, pathetic person doesn't know what the hell a boat is? The answer is Heinz Doofenshmirtz, because he constantly says boat and continuously boasts about how he came up with that term. I love especially that they bring this back briefly in Phineas and Ferb Hawaiian Vacation, where he blatantly remarks that he was corrected and that it's not boat, it's boat. Oh, and he also does the same thing for the word moat. You know what? I'm not questioning it anymore. The action scenes were neat, but nothing special. It was worth its share of laughs. This episode overall, I give 4 stars. I think it deserves it. I'm noticing more also that as the series progresses, my favorite stories on the Phineas and Ferb side seem to be when they involve helping their friends with something, no matter how simple or silly. It's just a really nice feeling when I see a story where they put their friends first. It's really nice. 202B, Tip of the Day. Phineas and Ferb decide to spread awareness of the term aglet, the tip of the shoelace. Doofenshmirtz is the star of the hottest viral video. I think this episode is legitimately one of the funniest of the entire show. It's not necessarily the story, although I do like the story, but the volume of jokes they tell. Every single joke hit bullseye. Right from the beginning, the jokes they make at Candace's expense work so well. Her joke about the computer and Phineas's later comeback to her had me on the floor laughing for hours. The crossword, "Where's Perry" joke was great. The bit in the backyard where Buford goes all apeshit on Baljeet for dissing aglets was unbelievably hilarious. And then they have the entire tri-state area get involved. They are overcome by aglet fever, much to Candace's expense. And it makes it so utterly memorable, and I couldn't believe how much I was laughing. It was so funny watching Candace go bonkers, having everyone around her succumb to aglet fever. That, on top of her refusal to even learn the name of a term, is what makes it even better. Then, they throw a full-blown concert later on and broadcast it around the world. And only then does Candace start to come around. Only to come back around and start shouting at the live crowd, trying to demonize them for buying into it. And they totally get on her for that. But then, through the magic of the doof plot, or as I call it, Deus Ex Machina, the crowd suddenly forgets about the term aglet, and they demonize her for trying to remind them what aglets are. And she still doesn't know what the term aglet is. By the end of the episode, she has been told that term several times, and she still doesn't know what it means. Every single joke, I swear, hit bullseye. And she is left completely befuddled. It was truly a masterpiece. I can't blame her, honestly, but damn it, the comedy just writes itself. I think this had the most attempts at jokes of any episode of the series, and each one of them hit bullseye. And the doof plot is even more enjoyable for me. Every moment is packed with hilarity. You see under highlights, I couldn't pick just one moment from that plot. Every bit of it is wonderful. First, there's Perry learning about his assignment, and Monogram showing Perry the viral video that he is so convinced was completely 100% intentional and a ploy to take over the tri-state area. If I have to pick one complaint about this episode, it was that scene and Monogram showing absolute disdain for the video. I know it's still relatively early in the show's run, but Doofenshmirtz is very incompetent. There was no way in hell that video was intentional. I would have liked it better if they had Monogram trying to be a stick in the mud, but then like maybe when Perry leaves for his mission, he loses his composure and then gives in to the laughter. But that's a small nitpick. And then Doofenshmirtz explaining to Perry the backstory of that video and having to witness him being mocked by random people all these years later. And then there's his invention, the Read My Mindinator, coupled with a universal delete button that would wipe it from everyone's memory. Coupled with a universal delete button, supplied by Perry, that would wipe the video from everyone's memory completely. Not only is that brilliant, but it makes the ultimate failure at the end all the more incredible. The viral video itself is one of the funniest things that's ever come from this show. I'm serious. No, Doofenshmirtz, you are not a superstar. Very few episodes, if any, compared to this one. 6 stars. And honestly, I think even that's underselling it. It's truly an underrated gem. 203A, Attack of the 50-Foot Sister. Phineas and Ferb help Baljeet win a competition at the Midsummer's Festival. Candace aims to become the next Flawless Girl spokesperson. Doofenshmirtz plots to cover the festival in the worst smell in the history of mankind. This is one of those where I feel like I should have enjoyed it more than I actually did. Sure, there's nothing inherently bad about it, and the plots are solid enough. The boys help Baljeet win a competition, a la Unfair Science Fair, and Candace tries to become a beauty product spokesgirl, and Doof's Smellinator plot. But the jokes didn't wow me as much as other episodes. Coming off tip of the day, the jokes here certainly don't stack up at all. There are some good bits though. I liked when Doofenshmirtz was describing the Smellinator. I liked when at the end it backfired on Doof and covered him in the scent of dirty baby diaper. That is repulsive. And the King Kong illusion near the end of Candace's story was pretty neat too, but that's really kind of it. I find myself not getting engrossed in the plots that center around Baljeet as much as maybe I should, and I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, I like his character. His character's fine. I think for this one, it's because it comes so soon after the Unfair Science Fair episodes. Heck, they even directly reference it at the beginning when Baljeet says, "A few days ago, you helped me build my portal to Mars." Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's cool when a show references itself like that, because it does show they have an understanding of continuity. But this is also an episodic show. It's not like Avatar: The Last Airbender or BoJack Horseman, where the narrative needs to be coherent and on a straight timeline. So you technically didn't need to make that reference, although I'm not really complaining, but because of that, this is basically the same plot as the Unfair Science Fair. This time, it's just more focused on the actual science fair. Baljeet's trying to win a biggest watermelon contest, so they create an elixir to make it grow, an elixir that Candace acquires and makes herself grow into a 50-foot tall monster. It's fine, but considering it's the follow-up to the portal to Mars, it's kind of a letdown in a sense, and it doesn't really have the right to feel like that because it is a nice story. I think also helping is that the Phineas and Ferb story doesn't get as much attention here as it did in the Unfair Science Fair episodes. Here, the Candace and Doof plot take the stage, but that only helps so much. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. There's nothing wrong with it, and there were some good jokes, but it is definitely not as strong as the other episodes. 203B. Backyard Aquarium. Phineas and Ferb build a giant aquarium for their new pet goldfish. Candace awaits a call from Jeremy. Doofenshmirtz plots to destroy hot dog vendors. I found myself liking the sentimentality of the episode more than the actual episode. There were some parts I enjoyed. Doof's bratwurst backstory was so funny, and the scene where Candace tries to rationalize when Jeremy will call her and shows her work, that was great. Oddly enough, I think the Candace plot in this episode is my favorite of the 3. I found myself empathizing with her more because I can empathize with the frantic emotions a teenager goes through concerning someone they like. I'm not saying it was that compelling or great, but I got on board with her more than I did with the other plots. Not that the other 2 plots are bad or don't have anything good going for them, The Phineas and Ferb story is rather nice, but the nice factor comes more from the sentimental value. They're doing something nice for their pet goldfish. Okay, that's sweet and all, and the aquarium is nice to look at, but one, when the hell did they get a new goldfish? And number two, there's not too many jokes being told in their story. I did find myself laughing when Candace got tangled into the show that Phineas and Ferb put on with the aquarium while she's trying to bust them, and the moment when Jeremy catches her falling, it's nice. So overall, it's not overly funny, but it does grab my attention, and the doof plot is alright. Just alright. Okay, Doofenshmirtz wants to destroy hot dog vendors because they put his bratwurst vendor out of business. Okay, the backstory admittedly was pretty funny despite its simplicity. Actually, I think it was funny because of its simplicity. Not every backstory needs to be convoluted and complex, they just need to be funny. And this one was. Even the hot dog bratwurst fight Doof and Perry had was pretty good too. There were enough small jokes for me to like this one, but there wasn't anything really that stood out too much. But at the same time, I do like the sentimental value this episode brings on the Phineas and Ferb side. I think it's deserving of 3 stars. Not overwhelmingly great, but nothing wrong either. I could see people loving this episode, and I could see people not being bothered with this episode. I think I'm in the middle ground. 204A, Day of the Living Gelatin. Phineas and Ferb create the world's biggest gelatin mold. Doofenshmirtz attempts to convert Agent P to evil, and accidentally turns the gelatin mold into a gelatin monster. This is another one where I feel like I should have been more entertained than I was. There's nothing wrong with it, again, but the jokes and stories, they don't captivate me like other episodes did. Phineas and Ferb's story. It's nice, but it's simple. They discover the fun of gelatin and decide to make a giant gelatin mold before it's turned evil because of Doof's inadvertent actions. It's nice, it's fun, it's got something there. And the Doof plot isn't that bad either. I do like the idea of Doof actively trying to convert Perry to evil, although I will go on record and say they did this a lot better in The Remains of the Platypus. Plus, there really isn't anything that I can point to in this plot that I feel is that funny. I guess it's cool when Doof's turn everything evilinator goes erratic and hits the gelatin mold, and yes, I said that right this time, turning it into a monster. And the curry joke was funny, but that's about it. This is another one that I think deserves 3 stars. It's another one where nothing's wrong with it and nothing that makes me scoff or roll my eyes. But if I want a big laugh or just a nice sweet feeling, this isn't one that I come back to consistently for. 204B, Elementary, my dear Stacy. Candace and Stacy emulate Sherlock Holmes while trying to bust Phineas and Ferb. Agent P is teamed with a British agent to stop Doofenshmirtz from moving Big Ben to the tri-state area. So you'll recall from a previous review where I said I don't usually like it when an episode puts an extra focus on Candace's efforts to bust the boys, but I can usually forgive it if they put an interesting twist on it, and here, yeah, I like the twist they do for this. I don't think it's like out of this world or super surprising, but it does strangely fit. And there's a lot of good comedy that comes from it. I especially like how Candace has to constantly distract Stacy from the thought of shopping so they can focus. And while I'm not crazy about Sherlock Holmes as it is, the episode does a great job capturing the style properly to make it a great satire. It makes it interesting to follow the story play out, and unlike most Candace-busting-centric episodes, I find myself wanting Candace to succeed, just because she's actually worked hard for it this time. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad she doesn't, but the episode made me want to. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is pretty standard. I can see now why they ran with the philosophy of what Phineas and Ferb do is the setting, and what Candace or Doofenshmirtz or another character is doing is the actual story. Because when you get right down to it, Phineas and Ferb's stuff rarely changes, but the other characters always have something different going on. And this episode is really enjoyable. They convert Big Ben into a gigantic water slide. Like I said, pretty standard, but it works. And the Doof plot is pretty good too, but more for the jokes than the actual plot. So, Perry's assigned to this snooty British agent to defeat Doofenshmirtz, and his plan is to move Big Ben to the tri-state area. I liked the oop joke Doof made to them. That was just hilarious. I even kind of liked the joke where when Monogram is explaining the plan to Perry and 000, Perry runs off without getting any specifics. 000 complains, and Monogram replies, "It was enough for the mammal." I even sort of like Doof's explanation for doing this convoluted plan, all because his watch was too small for his eyesight, so he just finds it easier to move Big Ben. I can totally understand people thinking it's a dumb joke, and trust me, I don't always like it. But here I thought it was funny. This episode, I think, on the whole, deserves 4 stars. There's a lot of good jokes in this one. The homage is pretty nice. The Phineas and Ferb stuff is exactly what you'd expect, and the comedy on Doof's part really brings it home. Episode 205A, Don't Even Blink. Candace tries to discover what happens to Phineas and Ferb's inventions. Doofenshmirtz makes an invisibility ray. This is one where I really like the concept of the episode, but I don't exactly love the execution. I really loved when this show tried to deconstruct its own formula. I get the criticisms of it being formulaic, but yes, this show does its formula very well, but a formula in and of itself is not bad. As long as the show understands itself to be formulaic and doesn't try to pretend that it's anything more than that. To this show's credit, yeah, they know they have a formula, they know they have a setup, and they run with it very well, and they do a great job subverting it at times. Like in this episode, Candace wants to know what happens to the boys' big ideas every day, so she and Stacy have the boys build a big, obvious ride and watch it in order to find out. That's literally it. They literally just sit down and watch it. And yeah, they tell some jokes, but it is just a bunch of kids, plus Candace and Stacy, sitting around waiting for a thing to do something without actually doing something with it. Like I said, the idea is great, but I'm not in love entirely with the execution. The Phineas and Ferb part of the episode isn't the strongest. I'm not going to say it's bad, but not much really happens. Other than the cool song, which is really good. There is a neat part near the end where they become convinced the driveway has a magical sensor of sorts that makes the big idea disappear and reappear, but that's really about it. It's not bad, I love the story, I just feel like they should have done more with it, but I'm not exactly sure what. Now the Doof plot, that's funny, starting with his evil plan. So he builds an invisibility ray, and he plans to shoot it at Girl Scouts who come up to his door, so he doesn't have to look at them and their puppy dog eyes. Meanwhile, he could easily shoot himself invisible and accomplish the exact same goal. Not to mention, he actually sicks on Perry an invisible tiger. Except the tiger attacks Doof and not Perry. That was easily the best part of the episode, as was Doof's attempt to fight Perry while invisible, only for him to not know how to shut the hell up and let Perry follow his voice around. It's always the best when Doof lets his incompetence do him in. I give this one 3 stars. I was very close to giving it 4 stars just because I liked the Doof plot very much. It's a shame too, because I really like the idea for this episode, and none of it really is bad, but I just didn't think the jokes on the Phineas and Ferb side were strong enough to make up for the simple plot. They did for the Doof plot, but that's only half the episode. 205B, Chez Platypus. The boys open a restaurant, which Jeremy asks Candace out to. Doofenshmirtz plots to destroy all love in the tri-state area if his blind date fails. I actually really like this one, even if the stories are simple. So Phineas and Ferb decide to open up their own trendy restaurant after a visit to one leaves them disappointed. They name it Chez Platypus because of course they do, and it becomes the trendiest restaurant in town, literally in hours. And it just happens to be the restaurant Jeremy asks Candace out to for their date. So, of course, they have to wait in line because, according to the bouncer, Buford, they didn't book a reservation. And Candace humorously points out that the restaurant didn't exist the day before. So they have to wait in line, and Buford rubs it in their face by letting other guests in behind her. My favorite part was the floating baby head cameo. Every time that thing shows up, I get such a huge laugh. It's just so what the hell. I even found myself really liking the Doof plot. It was nice getting to see him go out on a blind date and actually have some legitimate success without having to succumb to using an innator. And yeah, it is kind of weird that his date was never giving an actual name. I just call her Natalie. She looks like a Natalie. You know, Natalie. The duet between them was really nice too, and it was a bit sad at the end when his plan ultimately blows up in his face, and his de-lovinator drops to the ground, blasts his date, and she walks off, sort of angrily. Actually, I've never quite gotten that part. I mean, sure, I know the device is supposed to remove all love, but not having feelings for someone and being angry with someone are two different things. You can have the former without the latter, and vice versa. I'm not really sure what direction the voice actress got, but it just came off as a bit weird to me. Overall, this was really good. 4 stars. The plots weren't that crazy, but they didn't need to be. Everything else just blended together so well. 206A. Perry lays an egg. The boys learn how to properly care for an egg after they mistakenly think Perry has laid an egg. Doofenshmirtz plots revenge on the whales for stealing his old girlfriend. Okay. In all seriousness, though, the Doof plot of this episode is one of my favorites of the entire show. If for no other reason, because of how utterly stupid and pointless it is. Think about it. He wants revenge on whales for stealing his girlfriend. The level of what the fuck from this concept gets me every single time. So apparently he built this whale to English translator to try and show off his ability to speak to whales, but then when he uses it around actual whales, they badmouth him, and that somehow convinces the girlfriend to leave him and go live with the whales. in the ocean. And one of them apparently becomes her boyfriend or whatever. So his big evil plan is to learn how to speak whale properly so he can sing trash talk them. Okay then. But then the real kicker comes when Perry decides that this plan isn't evil enough, and he straight up abandons Doof. No, I'm not even kidding. He literally straight up abandons him, putting into motion a wild goose chase where Doof demands Perry to come back and thwart him. Once again, what in the actual hell? And at the end, Doof gets blown up and ends up in the whale his girlfriend left him for, where she comments that leaving him was the best decision she ever made. Poor Doof. Now, I know I always say most of the episodes have a stronger Doof/Candace plot than a Phineas and Ferb plot, but here I do legitimately like the Phineas and Ferb plot. So they stumbled across an egg and they mistakenly assume that Perry laid it. So they decide to build a giant platter droid to keep the egg safe and warm until Perry comes back. But they only end up building the bottom half, and Phineas's line, "Nothing says mother's love like a giant robotic platypus butt," is golden. It's golden. Candace becomes convinced that she has to care for the egg because I guess she sees the boys as unfit parents. So she becomes the egg's mother. Now the song in the episode is pretty pleasant, and of course at the end we learn that it wasn't a platypus egg at all. No, instead it was a rare whale song singing double-breasted angle hooper bird. I don't know either. And of course at the end, Candace is humiliated and forced to clean up the mess. Okay, this is something I take issue with. It's an even bigger problem in a later episode, but sometimes the show gets its morality confused. See, this would be an appropriate punishment if Candace had been a jerk or obnoxious or cruel to the boys, but she's not. See, as much as I think it's admirable that the show went to great lengths to not make its characters act jerky or stupid or cruel, when you do something like this, it kind of blows up in your face. What's worse is that Phineas is the one that tells their mom that he and Ferb built all the stuff Candace asked them to build. But he does it so casually. He's not saying it to get her in trouble. He's just answering a question for his mother. But all in all, that is a minor nitpick. Plus, the mom suit gag was pretty hilarious, especially at the end where Jeremy tells Candace he likes it on her. I'm giving this one 4 stars. I think had the Phineas and Ferb plot just had a touch more comedy in it, or the show was a bit more of the focus, I could have legitimately given it 5. There's more than enough funny stuff in the Doof plot, where had any of it got cut, I still would have felt satisfied. 206B, Gaming the System. The boys create their own video game and accidentally trap Candace inside. Doofenshmirtz plots to make men wear ball gowns. So, first the Phineas and Ferb plot. It's good. It's good. The boys make their own video game after being inspired by one of Buford's games, but through a series of unfortunate events, Candace becomes trapped in the game. And on the eve of the summer cotillion, which Candace is taking her to, so that's nice. So she's in curls and a bath towel, which is hilarious. They go in to save her. There's a really nice scene in the middle where Candace believes Phineas and Ferb have been killed by a Buford-resembling villain, and it's painfully obvious she does not understand how video games work. Which, admittedly, is a nice callback to Interview with a Platypus. I don't know if it was intentional, but that's how I took it. But no, the boys only lost a life. And it ends when the last level takes place in the real world and they defeat the monster. Or rather, Isabella defeats the monster. And of course, the Doof plot intervenes, changing Candace's outfit to a ball gown so she can go to the cotillion. And speaking of the Doof plot, I love the backstory Doof gives about how he had to wear the dresses his mother knitted because she expected to have a girl. Of course, the child ended up being his brother Roger. The introduction of his ball gowninator was simple and kind of nice. I get that's the joke, that it was supposed to be simple, but I don't know. I liked how the music and the atmosphere built it up to be something huge and menacing, and it turns out to be just something small. The fight scene was pretty good too. Overall, I like this one a lot. I give it 4 stars. But admittedly, it's on the low end. I was close to giving it 3 stars. But where it's usually the Doof plot that saves an episode from getting a lower rating, this time it was actually the Phineas and Ferb plot that saved it. 207, The Chronicles of Meap. The boys meet an alien named Meap and his nemesis, Mitch. Candace sets off to save them from Mitch's evil clutches. Doofenshmirtz attempts to find a long-lost companion. I absolutely love this one. From the introduction of Meap, to the introduction of Mitch, to Doof's incredibly convoluted scheme, to Phineas and Ferb's journey, meeting Meap and then trying to get out of Mitch's evil clutches, not to mention Candace going out of her way to try and rescue them, it was all amazing. I love the fun facts over there. How this episode was originally going to be 11 minutes, but apparently Dan and Swampy liked it so much they extended it to 22. I love how the end credits scene where they tease a fake trailer for a sequel episode, but then because of fan demand, they actually went ahead and made the sequel episode, which turned out to be Meapless in Seattle. And of course this was the final TV appearance for the late great Don LaFontaine. man of In a World. Now, unfortunately, I was never familiar with his work until it was too late, so unfortunately, I can't relate. There was a lot I loved about this episode. First off, Doof's convoluted backstory. Actually, no, it's not even one backstory. It's literally several backstories tied ass to ass that Doof doesn't even bother to elaborate on. Heck, by the end, I don't even want to know about them. But basically, they all center around him making friends with a balloon. Yeah, a balloon, which he sprays with a long-lasting spray that makes it not pop, and they become best friends. Wow, Doof was really a pathetic child. I'd feel more sorry for him if I didn't find his misfortunes hilarious. And then one day, while posing as the family lawn gnome, see, that's another thing I really love. The show has good continuity. Not BoJack Horseman good, but good in its own right. The balloon, which he had named Balloony, yeah, I know, floats away. It's so pathetically hilarious. I especially love near the end when Doof is mouthing off to Mitch about who his real best friend is, and he says Perry is his best friend, only for Perry to kick him off the ship. Now, I don't necessarily think this was mean on Perry's end or anything. It is his job to fight Doof and stop his evil plans, but it was a good moment. It was sweet, mixed in with comedy. I like that. Hell, I even like Candace's mini plot, where she gets obsessed with these toys called Bangaroos, and even mistakes Meap for one. There's a funny gag where she and Stacy are at this Bangaroo convention, and Meap goes missing and Candace gets berated by these security guards for losing him. It was great. This is a fantastic episode that introduces Meap and Mitch. Great characters. I am glad that the show eventually did the sequel episode, Meapless in Seattle, though I am still waiting for Meet Me in St. Louis. Overall, I give this one 5 stars. Now, there's one more part of this episode that I haven't talked about yet, but I saved it until after the rating because this isn't necessarily something that affects the rating. It's more of a personal gripe that I remember from the episode, and more so from the show itself. So, let's talk about Isabella and Phineas's relationship for a moment, shall we? It's a personal treat for me about this show. The way they are written together and separately is fantastic. Their relationship is something that we really don't ever see in TV that much. It's not romantic, but it's very clearly more than platonic, and it gets more evidence and more powerful as the series progresses. It's one of the reasons that this episode is one of my favorites of season 2, but it's not the biggest reason, obviously, but it's also one that I feel is worth an in-depth examination. So in this episode, Phineas, enamored by Meap's cuteness, builds a cute meter to find him when he wanders off. Throughout the episode, Isabella is jealous that Phineas constantly goes on and on about his cuteness. Meanwhile, there's an interference with the cute tracker, which Isabella constantly claims is her. Hell, the first time I saw the episode, I assumed it was her. But then at the end, it's revealed that apparently he, quote, took her cuteness into account and adjusted the settings on the device accordingly, because the next minute he recalibrates it to include her, it malfunctions and breaks. So pretty much this episode flat out confirms that Phineas at least sees Isabella as cute. Now this does bring an interesting theory into play, one that was suggested by former writer John Colton Berry, in that the idea that Phineas has feelings for Isabella that reciprocate her feelings for him is true, and that he's either simply distracted from it because of his big ideas, or just doesn't understand how to process them because he's a child. Both scenarios I could buy, and I do think they fit his character well enough. As the series progresses, we see that Phineas warms up to her more and more in a way that supports the theory. I am glad that they do this, because it's very rare that you see a relationship like this. Non-romantic, but more than platonic, and it's one fueled merely by innocence, joy, and sincerity. I'll bring this up more as we get to the appropriate episodes, especially once we get to a very specific episode, but that's a review for another time. This one's already getting way too long. Episode 208A. Thaddeus and Thor. When folks resembling Phineas, Ferb, and Candace stop in town, the rival sisters have the boys compete in a building competition. Doofenshmirtz attends a family reunion and attempts to win a kickball tournament. There are very, very few episodes of this series that I think are legitimately meh, and there are even fewer that I think that are legitimately bad. This is one of the bad ones. 1 star. I absolutely loathe this episode. There's even less here that I like than in Boyfriend from 27,000 BC. At least with that one, my biggest gripe was that the plots just meandered from point to point. But this one actively repulses me. Let's start with Thaddeus and Thor themselves. For a show that prides itself on not focusing on real jerks, these are very jarring characters to see. And there's no charm to them either. They're not like Albert, whose smugness is actually written and performed with some level of charm. No, there's none of that here. Mandy's the only one who gets any sort of charisma, but even then, most of it isn't seen until the episode Perry the Octopus. Plus, the episode's concept, the boys getting into a building competition with Thaddeus and Thor. First of all, Phineas and Ferb state within this episode that they don't do it to compete. They do it for fun, or for Ferb's case, and for the ladies. But here's the weird thing. I actually kind of like that idea. Or rather, at least, the idea of Phineas and Ferb getting to actually demonstrate their amazing skills to other people outside of their circle. Now, that's a really neat idea. But this was the absolute wrong way to do it. Not only is it needlessly cruel and mean-spirited, especially on Candace's part, but it's basically pointless. Mandy only makes one more appearance throughout the series, and Thaddeus and Thor are never seen again. The contest itself isn't even the main focus of the episode, because we spend more time with the doof plot, and that makes me care even less. Hell, it makes me care literally none whatsoever when Candace wrongly berates her brothers for building what she thinks is a pathetic fort, before they even reveal the entire thing. So at the end, I'm left rooting for Candace to fail in showing her mom the fort, and actually being happy when she fails. Also, remember I said in the last season video about the way the show sometimes tends to push morals aside when they present themselves? Well, I feel like the same thing happens here. I was thinking this episode was going to go for a don't make assumptions moral or appreciate your family no matter what moral, but no, we don't get anything like that. Like, at all. Plus, Thaddeus, Thor, and Mandy basically disappear from the episode near the end, and there's no real conclusion. She just drags her dumbfounded brothers away after witnessing the fort. That's it. This plot infuriated me more than any I've seen up to this point. And I haven't even gotten to the doof plot yet. Now, to be fair, the doof plot doesn't salvage the episode, but it is a little bit enjoyable. But only a little bit. I thought the idea that the way to Doof's mother's heart was through kickball was a little funny, and the song is actually kind of nice, even though I take issue with it being the exact same melody and style as Snuck Your Way Right Into My Heart. But that's a small thing. I did kind of like Doof's quote over there. Yeah, he reveals inadvertently that he's a cup stacking champion, and there's a scene near the end where Candace has to clean up the kitchen, and she stacks cups really quickly, and apparently it breaks Doof's record. I thought that was sort of amusing, but that's really it. I mean, that fun fact about Mandy is nice and all, but it doesn't save this episode at all. I'm sorry, but for me, there's barely anything salvageable here. I honestly came into this project thinking I'd never end up giving an episode lower than 2 stars, but here we are. Next, 208B. Deplane! Phineas and Ferb set out to build the world's biggest airplane out of paper mache. Doofenshmirtz goes green and builds an evaporator to dry up all the pools in the tri-state area. Candace and Stacy attend Jeremy's pool party. I do like this one, a lot more than I have in previous viewings. Each plot is simple, and while there aren't that many jokes in it, I thought they were enough to satisfy me. I think the Candace plot was actually the most enjoyable, which is weird for me because usually I'm just indifferent to her stories. But this time her story is not focused on busting her brothers. Instead, it's a typical teenage story. It's a pool party, and Candace thinks another girl, who turns out to be Jeremy's cousin, which is hilarious by the way, is stealing her from him, so she tries to show herself off. Ignoring the fact that we've already seen this in Swinter, we see her fail multiple times. And because of Deus Ex Machina, she ends up breaking her arm. When the pool dries up, because of Doofenshmirtz's evaporatory nature, everyone starts skateboarding. It's so funny, and they have a lot of good quotes there. Now, the Doof plot itself doesn't have much on it. I mean, the standout thing for me is the backstory. It's so hilariously simple, I can't help but laugh. His innator is centered around him never being allowed to swim as a kid, and literally his flashback is just his mother telling him no. And that's the whole thing. And it's hilarious. Sometimes less is more. Although the going green thing, that really doesn't have much to do with anything. I mean, memory doesn't serve me that well, but I'd have to assume this was a tie-in with Disney at the time for a going green promotion or whatever. So, fair enough, I guess. It just doesn't mean anything story-wise. Except for that it's solar-powered, but that's it. The Phineas and Ferb plot, what can I say? It's standard stuff. They build a plane, they fly it, they have a nice musical number, and at the end they land in a body of water, and the airplane soaks up the water, and they all float to land. That's it. Nothing special, but it serves well enough. I give the whole thing 3 stars. I think had there been a few more jokes, particularly on the Phineas and Ferb ends of things, it could have gotten 4 stars. I liked the banter between Isabella and Phineas. I swear, those two are adorable together. The peanut chicken joke, that was hilarious. That was the best joke of the plot, but that's really about it. Episode 209A, Let's Take a Quiz. Phineas and Ferb produce their own TV game show. Candace sets out to be the star of said game show to counter Jeremy's television commercial. Doofenshmirtz attempts to erase all infomercials in the tri-state area. For me, this episode is basically 2 really hilarious things. The fight scene between Doof and Perry where they exchange uses of the wacky gadgets that Doof's bought through infomercials, and the bet/non-bet between Carl and Monogran. That part, honestly, is one of the best jokes from those 2. And that's really about it. It's another episode where nothing is wrong, but nothing stands out either. I mean, the game show Phineas and Ferb make, I don't even get it. In fact, it almost gives off the throw crap at the wall impression. I mean, I respect it for its zaniness and insanity, but it's just not coherent. Then again, I know that's probably not the objective. The Candace plot I just find myself not getting into. Not that it's a bad one, but this specific one doesn't interest me, though I do like the resolution at the end with Jeremy and Candace. And Candace's line, "You have hunky ankles," admittedly got a laugh out of me. The Doof plot is funny, but not laugh out loud funny. The idea that Doof went balls to the wall in buying so many gadgets he saw on infomercials is pretty amusing. And in fairness, it's clever foreshadowing Joe's dilemma in Troy's story in season 4. But I don't know, this one just feels like a weaker one, but nothing wrong with it. 3 stars. 209B, at the car wash. Phineas and Ferb help Isabella and the Fireside Girls build a car wash, which Jeremy asks Candace out to raise money to save the star-nosed mole. Doofenshmirtz literally makes a mountain out of a molehill. Okay, so the Phineas and Ferb plot, I like the idea of the car wash, but its connection to the star-nosed mole, it doesn't really gel. I'm sure it was meant to loosely connect to the Doof plot, you know, moles, molehill, but it doesn't work. I was kind of expecting that joke where the molehills literally produce more star-nosed moles, because that would negate the need for fundraising, because then they wouldn't be endangered, but they didn't do that. I don't know if I like the episode more or less because of that. I did also kind of like how they made Phineas just awful at street talk. That was adorable. And the absurdity of Doof's plan, literally making mountains out of molehills because when he was young, he was constantly told, "Don't make a mountain out of the molehill." I think out of sheer what the hell, it was entertaining enough. So overall, I think I'm getting away with giving it 3 stars. It's not one of my personal favorites, but it gets by enough. Oh, and I didn't even mention Candace. So Jeremy invites her to the car wash, and Stacy gives her advice to slay hard to get. But, typical Candace, she ignores it and just does her own thing, and it ends up working out well. Nothing complicated, nothing extraordinary, but it's good. Episode 210A. Oh, there you are, Perry. After they become convinced Perry is lost, Phineas and Ferb use the power of music to find him. Candace, believing she is responsible for his disappearance, becomes racked with guilt. Perry is reassigned to a new nemesis. Now, here's an idea that I wish was 22 minutes to work with instead of just 11. So after Doofenshmirtz is downgraded to a low-level threat, oh, by the way, how the hell was he not a low-level threat before this? You know, if this show's continuity was like Avatar or BoJack Horseman, I could have totally seen the previous episode, At the Car Wash, be what pushes Alka to finally downgrade Doof to a low level and realize they've been wasting Perry's talent. Perry is reassigned to a new nemesis, and because of that, he is also facing reassignment to a new family, and that obviously bums him out. His new nemesis is named the Regurgitator, and he's kind of a dick. Sure, they play him up as legitimately threatening, but again, we only have 11 minutes to work with, and that's divided between this and the other subplot, and I guess technically the other subplot. They don't really give us much of a glimpse into who he is. Oh sure, they hint at his true evil nature by his line, "The world is my nemesis!" But that's it. I'm fine with what we got for 11 minutes, but if they had 22 or hell even 44 minutes, I wonder how far they really could have pushed this. And the Regurgitator's stick is, well, he's kind of dickish, doesn't respect anybody, and he wants to kill both Perry and Doofenshmirtz. Wait, what? Yeah, he wants to kill Perry and Doofenshmirtz, but that's about it. It's kind of generic, and they don't really do anything interesting with it. I'm actually kind of sad this guy never came back, not even for a mention. Now with that said, there were some good lines, and I did like the ending where Doof blows up as he and Perry are escaping the lair, and he lands on a throw pillar that Perry provides, and he remarks, "You guys do it right!" As for the Phineas and Ferb plot, what do you expect? The boys try to find Perry, while Candace racks herself with guilt, thinking she caused Perry to run away. But ultimately, at the end, they play a song, which is a nice song, that they think brings him back. It's a nice song, and that moment at the end where they all hug Perry is pretty sweet, but it's all mostly par for the course. So, 3 stars. I admit I'm sort of harsh on this episode more for what it could have been rather than for what it was. For what it was good, but there was a lot of untapped potential that I think nobody really talks about. Episode 210B, Swiss Family Phineas. The Flynn Fletcher family gets stranded on an island. Candace worries about being late to Jeremy's party. Doofenshmirtz uses free monkey labor to put all laundromats out of business. This one is just mostly forgettable for me. The Phineas and Ferb plot isn't that interesting. The problem with characters that don't go through arcs and don't change is that when you put them in a situation where the stakes are relatively high, you expect at least some level of change or reaction. And I know they'll never do a plot like this too seriously, seriously, but I didn't find myself that invested in the story because of that. Hell, I didn't really care that much for Candace's dilemma either. And quite frankly, her complaining about missing Jeremy's party is off-putting. No offense, but you're stuck on a damn island. I think that's more important. The only parts on the island that I legitimately liked was the Doof plot. So apparently Doofenshmirtz figured out what big laundry means, despite the fact that we already saw him sort of figure it out at the end of the Lake Nose Monster. Whatever. And he's planning to supply the tri-state area with free laundry that he thinks will drive all laundromats out of business, allowing him to start his own Institute of Evil? I'm sorry, I don't see how these points connect. Even with Doof's regular low standard of logic, it doesn't make sense. The fight scene was nice, and the part where Perry is dressed as a groom and Doof is in a wedding dress, that's 11 levels of hysterical. But that's about it. Oh, and there's a sort of subplot, I guess, where Baljeet is entrusted with watching Perry, and then when he thinks he's lost him, he panics and enlists Buford's help to make a fake Perry, thinking they won't notice the difference. It's so short and not really that funny. I think the one funny thing from it was when Buford was ordering ice cream from the ice cream truck, who was Carl in disguise, and he yells at him for giving him the wrong ice cream, but then mocks him for not charging him. That's about it. It's a 2-star episode. Also, did anyone else get really uncomfortable when Candace screamed at Phineas for building a giant shelter when all they needed to do was build a simple hut? Seriously, that came right out of nowhere. I think when I was younger, this was the point where I really started to hate Candace's character.